The rain turned the main street of Provo, Utah Territory, into a churning river of mud on that miserable afternoon in late September 1878. And Kendall watched in horror as the stagecoach driver tossed her trunks from the top of the coach, sending them splashing into the deepest part of the mire below. "Wait, please be careful with those," Catherine called out, but her voice was lost in the downpour. She stood on the wooden walkway outside the depot, her traveling dress already splattered with mud from the journey, her dark hair escaping from its pins in the humidity. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, barely glanced her way as he continued heaving luggage down with careless abandon. "Got a schedule to keep, miss," he grunted. "Can't be mollycoddling every piece of baggage what comes through here." Catherine felt her cheeks burn with frustration and embarrassment. She was 22 years old, newly arrived from Boston to take a position as a schoolteacher, and everything she owned in the world was in those 3 trunks now sinking into the mud. Her books, her mother's china, her clothes, the few precious mementos of her family who had all succumbed to fever 2 winters past. She had spent every cent she had on the journey west, seeking a fresh start where the memories would not haunt her at every turn. "But I cannot possibly carry all of that myself," she protested, stepping to the edge of the walkway and looking down at the wreckage of her belongings. Brown water was already seeping into the seams of the leather trunks. "Not my concern, lady." The driver climbed back up to his seat, and within moments the stagecoach was rolling away, leaving Catherine standing alone in the rain. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears. This was not how she had imagined her arrival. She had pictured herself stepping gracefully into her new life, composed and ready to begin teaching the children of this frontier town. Instead, she was stranded with no way to retrieve her possessions, and no idea where she was supposed to go. The letter from the school board had mentioned lodgings at a boarding house, but she had no address, no directions, nothing but a name scrawled on a piece of paper now damp in her reticule. "Madam, you need some help there." The voice came from behind her, deep and warm despite the chill of the rain. Catherine turned to find a man on horseback, leading a pack mule. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his head by the rain and eyes the color of summer sky. He wore the practical clothing of a cattleman: sturdy trousers, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better days but still kept most of the rain from his face. "I am afraid the stagecoach driver was rather careless with my luggage," Catherine said, trying to maintain some dignity despite her bedraggled appearance. "And I have no means to retrieve it." The cowboy swung down from his horse with easy grace, landing in the mud with a soft splash. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and a kind expression that put her somewhat at ease. "Well, that ain't right. I mean, that is not right," he corrected himself, and Catherine saw color rise in his cheeks. "Let me get those for you." "Oh, I could not possibly ask you to ruin your clothes," Catherine protested, but he was already wading into the mud, his boots making sucking sounds with each step. "These clothes have seen worse than a little mud, madam. Name is Caleb Harrison, and I work at the Circle H Ranch just outside town. Been through worse than this rounding up cattle in a storm." He bent and hauled up the first trunk, grunting slightly at the weight. "Where are you headed with all this?" "I am the new schoolteacher," Catherine said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold rain. "Catherine Kendall. I am supposed to be staying at a boarding house, but I am afraid I do not have the specific address." "Mrs. Patterson's place, most like," Caleb said, hoisting the trunk onto his shoulder. "That is where the last teacher stayed. I will get you there safe and sound." He carried the trunk to the walkway and set it down with surprising gentleness, then returned for the second. "You come all the way from back east, Boston," Catherine confirmed, watching as he wrestled with the second trunk. It was heavier than the first, containing most of her books. "My family passed away and there was nothing left for me there. The position here seemed like Providence." Caleb paused, looking up at her with sympathy in his eyes. "I am real sorry for your loss, Miss Kendall. That is a hard thing, losing family, but Provo is a good town. Folks here will treat you right." He managed to get the trunk free of the mud and carried it to join the first. "You got one more there, right?" "Yes, the smallest one." Catherine pointed to where it had landed partially under the walkway. "I can help. This is far too much to ask of a stranger." "No stranger now. We have been introduced proper." Caleb grinned at her, and Catherine felt something flutter in her chest. It was just gratitude, she told herself. The man was helping her when no one else had bothered to stop. "Besides, my mama would have my hide if she heard I left a lady stranded in the mud. She raised me better than that." He retrieved the final trunk, this one lighter and containing her personal items and clothing. When all three were safely on the walkway, Caleb stood dripping and covered in mud up to his knees, but still smiling. "Now, let me get these loaded on my pack mule and we will get you to Mrs. Patterson's. You must be chilled through." Catherine was indeed shivering, though she was not certain if it was entirely from the cold. There was something about this man, this cowboy who had stopped without hesitation to help a stranger, that made her feel warm despite the rain. She watched as he efficiently secured her trunks to the mule, speaking softly to the animal as he worked. His hands were strong and capable, scarred from hard work but gentle with the ropes. "There we are," he said finally. "Now you can ride my horse if you like. It is only a few blocks, but no sense in you walking through all this." "I can walk," Catherine said quickly. "You have already done so much. Please, Miss Kendall, you are already soaked through and those shoes were not made for this kind of mud." He gestured to her fine leather boots, now hopelessly stained. "Chester here would not mind at all. Would you, boy?" He patted the horse's neck affectionately. Catherine hesitated, then nodded. The truth was that her feet were freezing, and her skirts were so heavy with water and mud that each step was an effort. "You are very kind, Mr. Harrison." Caleb helped her mount, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. Catherine felt her breath catch at the contact, brief as it was. Once she was settled, he took Chester's reins and began leading the horse and mule down the muddy street. He walked through the muck as if it was nothing, occasionally pointing out landmarks as they went. "That is the mercantile there. Mr. Chen runs it, real fair prices. And that is the saloon, though I do not expect you will have much call to go in there. The church is just around the corner and the schoolhouse is maybe half a mile east of town. It is a nice building. They built it just 3 years ago." Catherine listened to his voice, finding comfort in the steady stream of information. Provo was larger than she had expected, with several well-built brick buildings interspersed among the wooden structures. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in clouds, and she could see orchards and farmland beyond the edge of town. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that was nothing like Boston's orderly streets and manicured parks. "Here we are," Caleb said, stopping in front of a 2-story house with a wide porch. Smoke curled from the chimney and warm light glowed in the windows. "Mrs. Patterson runs a tight ship, but she is good-hearted. She will take good care of you." He helped Catherine down from the horse, and she found herself reluctant to let go of his arm. "Mr. Harrison, I do not know how to thank you. You have been so generous with your time." "Just Caleb, please, and there is no need for thanks. I am glad I was passing by when you needed help." He began untying her trunks from the mule. "Let me get these onto the porch for you." The front door opened before Catherine could respond, and a plump woman with gray hair and a welcoming smile emerged. "Goodness gracious, you must be Miss Kendall. We have been expecting you. Come in out of that rain right this instant before you catch your death. Caleb Harrison, is that you under all that mud?" "Yes, madam, Mrs. Patterson, just helping the new teacher get settled. Bless your heart. Your mama raised you right." Mrs. Patterson ushered Catherine toward the door. "Come in, dear. I have hot water ready for a bath and stew on the stove. You look half frozen." Catherine paused in the doorway, turning back to look at Caleb. He was carrying the last trunk onto the porch, rain streaming from his hat. "Will I see you again?" The words were out before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks flush. Caleb looked up, and the smile that spread across his face made Catherine's heart skip. "I expect so, Miss Kendall. It is a small town, and I come in regular for supplies. Besides, my niece Emma will be one of your students. I am sure I will be by the schoolhouse from time to time." "I would like that," Catherine said softly, then allowed Mrs. Patterson to pull her inside. The boarding house was warm and smelled of bread and wood smoke. Mrs. Patterson kept up a steady stream of cheerful chatter as she led Catherine upstairs to a small but clean room with a bed, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "The bathhouse is just down the hall, dear. I will have my son bring up your trunks and some hot water. You get yourself warm and dry and then come down for supper. I want to hear all about your journey." Catherine changed out of her wet clothes, her fingers clumsy with cold. As she toweled her hair dry, she found herself going to the window and looking out. She could just see Caleb leading his horse and mule back down the street, his figure growing smaller in the rain. Something had shifted in her heart in the past hour, something unexpected and thrilling and terrifying all at once. She had come to Provo to escape her past and build a new life. She had not expected to meet someone like Caleb Harrison, had not expected to feel anything but grief and determination. But as she watched him disappear around the corner, Catherine realized that perhaps Providence had brought her here for more than one reason. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the air clean. Catherine woke early, still accustomed to Boston time, and dressed carefully in one of her better day dresses, a deep green that brought out the color of her hazel eyes. Mrs. Patterson had already prepared breakfast by the time Catherine came downstairs, and she found herself seated at a long table with several other boarders. 2 minors, a clerk from the bank, and a young married couple who were saving money to build their own house. "The school board will be coming by this afternoon to meet with you and show you the schoolhouse," Mrs. Patterson said, pouring coffee for everyone. "But you have the morning to get yourself settled. If you need anything from the mercantile, just put it on account and let them know you are boarding here." Catherine spent the morning unpacking her trunks, carefully inspecting her books for water damage. Most had survived the dunking, though a few would need to be dried carefully to prevent the pages from sticking together. She laid them out by the window where the sun could reach them, then turned her attention to her clothes. Several dresses would need washing, and she made a mental note to ask Mrs. Patterson about laundry arrangements. At 2 o'clock, a knock at the door announced the arrival of Mr. Garrett, head of the school board. He was a serious man in his 50s with gray mutton chops and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Kendall, welcome to Provo. I trust your journey was not too arduous." Catherine thought of her luggage in the mud and Caleb's kindness, but simply smiled. "It had its challenges, but I am very happy to be here." Mr. Garrett escorted her to the schoolhouse, explaining the expectations and curriculum as they walked. The building was indeed new and well-maintained, with large windows that let in plenty of light and a pot-bellied stove for heat. Student desks stood in neat rows, and there was a larger desk at the front for Catherine, along with a blackboard and chalk. "We have approximately 30 students, ages 6 to 16, Mr. Garrett explained. Some of the older boys only attend when farm work permits, but we expect you to maintain discipline and ensure they are learning. The previous teacher was rather lax in that regard, which is why we sought someone with formal training from back east." Catherine ran her hand over one of the desks, feeling a sense of purpose settling over her. This was why she had come here. This was her new beginning. "I assure you, Mr. Garrett, I take education very seriously. These children will learn." "Good. School begins Monday morning at 8 o'clock. You may come in early to prepare as you see fit." He handed her a key. "The town is depending on you, Miss Kendall. Do not let us down." After he left, Catherine spent some time arranging the classroom to her liking. She made lists of supplies she would need, planned out the first week of lessons, and imagined the faces of the children who would soon fill these desks. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not notice the sun sinking toward the mountains until the light grew dim. As she locked the schoolhouse door and started back toward the boarding house, she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped before she could stop it, and she turned to see Caleb riding toward her on Chester. He had cleaned up since yesterday, wearing a fresh shirt and a clean hat, though his boots still bore the scars of hard use. "Evening, Miss Kendall," he called, tipping his hat. "How do you like the schoolhouse?" "It is wonderful," Catherine said, smiling up at him. "Far better equipped than I expected. Mr. Garrett says I will have about 30 students." "That sounds right. My niece Emma is 8 years old, smart as a whip but shy. Her mama, that is my sister Sarah, asked me to make sure you knew Emma is a good girl but might need some encouragement to speak up in class." Caleb swung down from his horse, falling into step beside Catherine as she walked. He led Chester with one hand, the reins held loosely. "I will watch out for her," Catherine promised. "Does she have siblings in school as well?" "2 brothers younger, and my other sister has 3 more coming. It is a full classroom." Caleb cleared his throat. "I was wondering, if it is not too forward, whether you might like someone to show you around town proper. You have only seen it in the rain and the parts Mr. Garrett showed you. There is more to Provo than the school and the boarding house." Catherine's pulse quickened. "I would like that very much. When were you thinking?" "Tomorrow is Saturday. I have the morning free before I need to get back to the ranch. I could come by around 9 if that suits you." "That would be perfect." Catherine felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Thank you, Caleb. You have been so kind since I arrived." "It is not just kindness," Caleb said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, you seem like a nice person and I would like to be friends, if that is all right with you. Friends." Catherine tested the word in her mind and found it was not quite enough to describe what she was feeling, but it was a start. "I would like that very much." They had reached the boarding house, and Caleb helped her up the steps to the porch. His hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary, and Catherine felt electricity run up her arm at the contact. "I will see you tomorrow morning then," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Tomorrow," Catherine agreed, and went inside before she could do something foolish like ask him to stay. Mrs. Patterson was setting the table for supper and gave Catherine a knowing look. "That Caleb Harrison is a good man. His family has had that ranch for years. Hard workers, all of them, and honest as the day is long. His mama and I have been friends since we were girls." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "He is just being kind to a newcomer." "Him," Mrs. Patterson said, entirely unconvinced. "Well, kind or not, you could do worse than making friends with the Harrisons." They are good people." That night, Catherine lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the frontier town. Dogs barking in the distance, someone playing a fiddle in one of the saloons, the wind rustling through the trees. She thought about Caleb's smile, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, the strength in his hands when he had lifted her down from the horse. She had not come to Provo looking for romance. After losing her family, she had convinced herself that her purpose was teaching, that she would pour all her love and energy into educating children and making a difference. The idea of opening her heart to someone new, of risking the pain of loss again, had seemed impossible. But Caleb Harrison had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. And as Catherine drifted off to sleep, she allowed herself to hope, just a little, that maybe this new beginning held more possibilities than she had imagined. Saturday morning arrived with golden sunshine and a crisp autumn breeze. Catherine took extra care with her appearance, choosing a practical walking dress in deep blue and pinning her hair up neatly. She told herself it was just because she wanted to make a good impression on the townspeople, not because of Caleb specifically, but her racing heart knew the truth. He arrived precisely at 9, riding Chester and leading a gentle mare. "I thought you might like to ride out a ways," he said. "The town is fine, but the real beauty of this place is in the land around it, if you are comfortable on horseback. I have ridden before, though not recently." Catherine approached the mare, letting the horse sniff her hand. "What is her name?" "Rosie. She is sweet-tempered and easy for someone getting back into riding." Caleb helped Catherine mount, and again she felt that spark when his hands touched her waist. Once she was settled in the saddle, he mounted Chester and they set off at an easy walk through town. Caleb pointed out buildings and introduced Catherine to people they passed. The blacksmith, a massive man named Tom who had arms like tree trunks. Mrs. Chen at the mercantile, who insisted Catherine come in sometime to see the new fabrics that had just arrived from San Francisco. The doctor, a kindly older gentleman who welcomed her to town and said he hoped she would not need his services often. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and Catherine began to feel that she might truly belong here. As they left the main part of town behind and rode into the surrounding countryside, Caleb seemed to relax even more. He sat easy in the saddle, clearly in his element. "How long have you lived here?" Catherine asked as they followed a trail that wound between fields and orchards. "All my life. My parents came out here in 1855 before I was born. It was harder then, fewer people, more danger from raids and such. But they built the ranch from nothing, and now it is one of the most successful in the territory." There was pride in his voice, but not arrogance. "I have 2 sisters, like I mentioned. Sarah is married to a farmer and Margaret married a man who works at the bank. They both live in town with their families. And you never wanted to leave, see other places." Catherine could not imagine living her whole life in one place, though the past few years had taught her that home could be lost in an instant. Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "I thought about it when I was younger. Wanted to see the ocean, maybe go to San Francisco or even back east. But the more I traveled even just to Salt Lake City or down to Arizona, the more I realized that this is where I belong. The land here, it gets into your blood. These mountains, these valleys, they are part of who I am." He glanced at her. "Does that sound foolish?" "No," Catherine said softly. "It sounds wonderful, to be so certain of where you belong. I envy that. You do not feel you belong in Boston. I did once. But after my family died, everything there felt hollow. The house was full of ghosts. Every street corner held a memory. I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere I could breathe again." Catherine surprised herself with her honesty. She had not talked about this with anyone, not even in her letters to the school board. Caleb reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I am sorry you went through that, but I am glad, selfish as it might be, that your path brought you here." They rode to a spot where a creek bubbled over smooth stones, with cottonwood trees providing shade. Caleb helped Catherine dismount, and they sat on a fallen log, watching the water and listening to the birds. It was peaceful in a way Catherine had not experienced in years. In Boston, there was always noise, always people, always something demanding her attention. Here she could just be. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, wanting to know more about Caleb's life. "What is it like?" His face lit up. "We run cattle mostly, about 500 head right now. It is hard work, especially during calving season and roundup, but I love it. Being out on the range, working with the animals, seeing the results of your labor. My father is getting older, so I have been taking on more of the management. We have 6 hands who work for us, good men all of them." He picked up a pebble and tossed it into the creek. "The land itself is beautiful. We have a valley with a river running through it, good grazing, timber in the hills for building and firewood. The house is not fancy, but it is solid and comfortable." "It sounds wonderful," Catherine said, and meant it. She tried to picture Caleb in that landscape, riding across open range with the mountains in the background, and found the image fit him perfectly. "Maybe you could come see it sometime," Caleb said, then quickly added, "For a proper visit, I mean. My mama would love to meet you, and she makes the best apple pie in the territory. Sarah and Margaret are always at the house on Sundays for dinner. It can get pretty lively with all the children running around." "I would like that," Catherine said. The thought of meeting his family made her nervous but also excited. She wanted to know more about the people who had shaped Caleb into the man he was. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Caleb told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk, about the time he had tried to bring a calf into the house as a pet, and his mother had chased him around the yard with a broom. Catherine told him about Boston, about her father's bookstore where she had spent her childhood reading everything she could get her hands on, about her mother's garden and her younger brother's mischievous pranks. "You had a brother?" Caleb asked gently. "Thomas." "He was 16 when the fever took him. My father went next, then my mother. I nursed them all, but there was nothing I could do. The doctors said it was just bad luck, a virulent strain." Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "Thomas wanted to be a doctor himself. He would have been good at it." Caleb put his arm around her shoulders and Catherine leaned into his warmth. It felt natural, right, as if she had known him for years instead of days. "They would be proud of you," he said quietly. "Coming all this way to make a new life, teaching children, that takes real courage." "Sometimes I do not feel very courageous. Sometimes I feel like I am just running away." "There is a difference between running away and moving forward. You are moving forward, Catherine. I can see it in the way you talk about your students, about the school. You are building something here." Catherine looked up at him, at the kindness in his blue eyes and the strength in his features. Without thinking about it, she reached up and touched his cheek. "You are a remarkable man, Caleb Harrison." "I am just a cowboy," he said, but his voice was rough with emotion. His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. "But I would like to be more to you if you would let me." "I would like that too," Catherine whispered, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. She kissed him back, tasting sunshine and hope and the promise of something new. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I should probably take you back to town before Mrs. Patterson sends out a search party," Caleb said, but he was smiling. "Though I am tempted to stay here all day." They rode back slowly, hands occasionally brushing as their horses walked side by side. Catherine felt like she was floating, her heart lighter than it had been in years. When they reached the boarding house, Caleb helped her down and then just stood there, holding her hands. "Can I see you tomorrow? After church, maybe?" "Yes," Catherine said. "I would like that very much." He kissed her again, quick and sweet, then mounted Chester and rode away. Catherine watched him go, then turned to find Mrs. Patterson watching from the window with a satisfied smile. Sunday morning, Catherine attended services at the local church, a simple white building with a tall steeple. She sat with Mrs. Patterson and met what felt like the entire town. Everyone wanted to welcome the new teacher, to introduce their children who would be in her class, to invite her to various social events. It was overwhelming but also heartwarming. She spotted Caleb sitting with his family several rows ahead. An older couple who must be his parents, two women with their husbands and clusters of children around them. Caleb kept glancing back at her, and each time their eyes met, Catherine felt her heart skip. After the service, he introduced her to everyone. His mother, Eleanor Harrison, was a handsome woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. His father, Charles, was tall like Caleb with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of years in the sun. His sisters were friendly and immediately began peppering Catherine with questions about Boston and her journey west. "You must come for Sunday dinner," Eleanor insisted. "I will not take no for an answer. Caleb has told us all about you, and I want to get to know the new teacher properly." Catherine accepted, touched by the warm welcome. She rode out to the ranch in the back of a wagon with Margaret and her children, while Caleb rode alongside on Chester. The ranch was even more beautiful than she had imagined, with the house sitting in a sheltered valley surrounded by trees that were just starting to turn gold with autumn. The house itself was large and rambling, clearly added onto over the years as the family had grown. Inside, it was comfortable and lived in, with well-worn furniture and children's drawings pinned to the walls. The smell of roasting chicken and fresh bread filled the air. Dinner was a lively, chaotic affair with children talking over each other and adults trying to maintain some semblance of order. Catherine found herself seated next to Caleb, his knee occasionally brushing hers under the table in a way that made her pulse race. Eleanor kept making sure Catherine's plate was full, and Charles told stories about the early days of the ranch that had everyone laughing. After the meal, while the women cleaned up and the children played outside, Caleb asked Catherine if she wanted to see the rest of the ranch. They walked through the barn where horses nickered softly in their stalls, past the chicken coop where hens scratched in the dirt, and up a small hill that overlooked the entire valley. "This is my favorite spot," Caleb said, standing behind Catherine with his arms around her waist. "On a clear day you can see for miles. In the spring, everything is green and there are wildflowers everywhere. In the winter, it is all snow and so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat." "It is beautiful," Catherine said, leaning back against his chest. "I can see why you love it here." "I want to build my own place someday," Caleb said quietly. "Not far from the main house, but something that is mine, a house for a family." He paused, then continued, his voice uncertain. "I know it is too soon to talk about such things. We have only known each other a few days. But Catherine, I need you to know that I am serious about you. This is not some passing fancy. When I saw you standing there in the rain, when I looked into your eyes, something just clicked into place, like I had been waiting for you without even knowing it." Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "I feel it too. I know it is crazy that people will say we are moving too fast, but I do not care. For the first time since I lost my family, I feel like I am home, and that home is with you." Caleb kissed her then, deep and passionate, his hands tangling in her hair. Catherine kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside, all the loneliness and grief and hope for the future. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "Marry me," Caleb said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it is too soon and I should court you properly for months, but Catherine, I do not want to wait. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me," Catherine laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Yes. Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy. The sound carried down to the house, and within moments his entire family came running up the hill to see what was happening. When Caleb announced their engagement, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then everyone was talking at once. Eleanor hugged Catherine tightly. "Welcome to the family, dear. I know this is fast, but when you know, you know. I accepted Charles's proposal after knowing him for 2 weeks, and we have been happy for 30 years. Charles shook Caleb's hand, then pulled him into a hug. "You chose well, son. She is a good woman." The sisters were already planning the wedding, talking about dresses and flowers and who would make the cake. The children jumped around excitedly, thrilled by the celebration even if they did not fully understand what was happening. That evening, as Catherine rode back to town in the wagon, she kept looking at the simple gold band Caleb had placed on her finger. It had belonged to his grandmother, Eleanor had explained, and it was a Harrison family tradition to give it to the new bride. Catherine turned it on her finger, marveling at how her life had changed in just a few days. The next morning was her first day of school. Catherine was up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She dressed carefully in a sensible dark skirt and white shirtwaist, pinned her hair up severely, and walked to the schoolhouse in the cool morning air. She had the classroom ready, books distributed, lessons planned. When the first students began arriving, Catherine greeted each one with a warm smile. Emma Harrison was exactly as Caleb had described, a sweet girl with dark braids and shy eyes. She brightened when Catherine said, "You must be Emma. Your Uncle Caleb has told me so much about you." "You are marrying Uncle Caleb," Emma said, her eyes wide. "Everyone is talking about it. Does that mean you will be my aunt?" "I suppose it does," Catherine said, charmed by the idea. "I hope we will be good friends." The day passed in a blur of introductions and assessments. Catherine needed to figure out where each student was academically, so she could plan appropriate lessons. Some of the older children were quite advanced, having had good teaching before. Others, particularly some of the farm children who attended only sporadically, struggled with basic reading and arithmetic. Catherine made notes and planned strategies, determined to help each child succeed. Word of her engagement to Caleb had indeed spread through the town like wildfire. Several parents made a point of congratulating her when they came to collect their children. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a special dinner in celebration, and the other boarders toasted Catherine's happiness with cider. Caleb came by every evening that week, sitting on the porch with Catherine and talking about their plans. They decided on a simple ceremony in 6 weeks, enough time for Catherine to establish herself as a teacher and for Eleanor to make the necessary preparations. Catherine would continue teaching after the marriage, at least until they had children, and Caleb was already working with his father to build a small house on the ranch property. "Nothing fancy," he said, showing Catherine the plans he had sketched. 2 bedrooms to start, with room to add on. A big kitchen because I know you like to cook. A porch where we can sit in the evenings. A room that could be a study for you, a place for your books. Catherine looked at the drawings and felt tears prick her eyes. He had thought of everything, had planned a home that would be perfect for both of them. "It is wonderful, Caleb, more than I ever dreamed of." The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of teaching, wedding preparations, and stolen moments with Caleb. Catherine threw herself into her work at the school, developing innovative teaching methods that got even the most reluctant students engaged. She started a reading club for the older girls, teaching them poetry and literature. She worked with the boys on their arithmetic, showing them how mathematics applied to ranching and farming. Word spread that the new teacher was strict but fair, demanding but kind, and parents began sending children who had previously stayed home to help with chores. In the evenings and on weekends, Catherine spent time with the Harrison family. Alina taught her to make bread and canned vegetables for the winter. Margaret and Sarah included her in their weekly sewing circle, where the women of the town gathered to work on quilts and share gossip. Catherine felt herself becoming part of the community in a way she had never experienced in Boston, where neighbors had been polite but distant. And through it all, her love for Caleb grew deeper. She learned his habits and quirks, the way he always checked on the horses before bed, his love of bad jokes, his tendency to hum while he worked. He learned hers too, her need for quiet time with a book, her perfectionism about her teaching, the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing their hopes and fears and dreams. Caleb confessed that he worried about being a good enough husband, about providing for a family in a land where drought or disease could wipe out a herd in weeks. Catherine admitted her fear of loving and losing again, of opening her heart only to have it shattered. They comforted each other, made promises, and built a foundation of trust and understanding. The wedding took place on a crisp November day, with golden leaves falling from the trees and a clear blue sky overhead. Catherine wore a simple white dress that Margaret and Sarah had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Alina had given her a cameo that had belonged to Caleb's grandmother to pin at her throat. Her hair was pinned up with white flowers that Caleb had ridden 3 hours to get from a hothouse in Salt Lake City. The ceremony was held in the church, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Catherine had no family to give her away, so Charles Harrison offered to walk her down the aisle. As she placed her hand on his arm, he smiled down at her kindly. "You are already a daughter to us," he said quietly. "We are proud to have you join our family." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as she walked toward where Caleb stood at the altar. He looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes shining with love. When she reached him and took his hands, Catherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she was meant to be. This was home. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. Caleb's voice was steady as he spoke his vows, promising to love and cherish Catherine for all his days. Catherine's voice shook slightly but grew stronger as she made the same promises, meaning every word with her whole heart. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Catherine with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Then they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside despite the autumn chill. Alina and the other women had prepared a feast: roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables, pies, and cakes. There was music and dancing, with Caleb's father playing the fiddle and one of the ranch hands on guitar. Caleb swept Catherine into a waltz, and she laughed with pure joy as he spun her around. "Happy, Mrs. Harrison?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Catherine replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. As the sun set and the stars came out, Caleb led Catherine to their new house. It was finished, smelling of fresh lumber and paint. Inside, Alina and the girls had made the bed with a beautiful quilt and stocked the kitchen with supplies. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space with warmth. "Welcome home, Catherine," Caleb said, carrying her over the threshold. That night, in the privacy of their own home, Catherine and Caleb came together as husband and wife. There was tenderness and passion, nervous laughter and whispered words of love. Afterward, lying in Caleb's arms, Catherine felt a peace she had not known since before her family's death. She had found her place in the world, and that place was here, with this man who had helped a stranger with muddy luggage and somehow become her entire world. The winter passed in a blur of happiness. Catherine continued teaching, riding into town each morning on Rosie and returning in the evenings to the home she shared with Caleb. The students thrived under her instruction, and she took pride in their progress. Little Emma had come out of her shell and was now one of the brightest pupils, always eager to answer questions and help the younger children. At home, Catherine and Caleb settled into married life with surprising ease. They had their disagreements, of course. Catherine wanted more books than their small shelf could hold, and Caleb thought she spent too much time grading papers and not enough time relaxing. Caleb sometimes tracked mud through the house after working with the cattle, which drove Catherine to distraction. But they learned to communicate, to compromise, to laugh at themselves when they were being ridiculous. In the spring, Catherine discovered she was expecting a baby. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. The memory of losing her family was still fresh enough to make her afraid of loving something so deeply, of risking that kind of loss again. But Caleb held her and promised that everything would be all right, that they would face whatever came together. Dr. Matthews assured Catherine that she was healthy and the pregnancy was progressing normally. Alina shared wisdom from her own experiences and helped Catherine prepare. Margaret and Sarah threw a lovely party where the women of the town brought gifts and advice. Mrs. Patterson moved Catherine's teaching responsibilities to a younger woman who had just arrived in town, insisting that Catherine needed to focus on her health. The baby came in late November, almost exactly a year after Catherine and Caleb's wedding. The labor was long and difficult, with Catherine gripping Caleb's hand so hard she left bruises. But when she finally held her son in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. He had Caleb's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, and he was perfect. They named him Thomas Charles Harrison, after Catherine's brother and Caleb's father. Both men cried when they heard, though Charles tried to hide it by coughing loudly and claiming he had something in his eye. Caleb was a devoted father from the first moment, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, singing silly songs to make him smile, helping with feeding and changing without complaint. Watching him with their son, Catherine fell even more deeply in love with her husband. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch faced a drought one summer that nearly wiped out the herd, and Catherine and Caleb tightened their belts and prayed. They made it through with the help of the family and the community, everyone pulling together to share resources and keep the cattle alive. The next year brought abundant rain and good grass, and the herd recovered. 2 years after Thomas was born, Catherine had a daughter they named Alina Rose, after Caleb's mother and the gentle mare Catherine had ridden on their first real time together. Ellie, as they called her, was a sunny child who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything. She had Catherine's hazel eyes and Caleb's easy smile. Charles Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was 5 and Ellie was 3. The whole family mourned him, but they took comfort in knowing he had seen his grandchildren and died happy. Alina came to live with Caleb's sister Sarah, unable to manage the big house on her own. The ranch passed to Caleb, who ran it with the same integrity and skill his father had taught him. Catherine returned to teaching part-time once both children were in school themselves. She loved seeing Thomas and Ellie in her classroom, though she was careful to treat them exactly as she did every other student. Thomas was serious and studious like his mother, always with his nose in a book. Ellie was more social, making friends easily and bringing stray animals home with distressing regularity. More children followed. A second son, James, who was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees and getting into scrapes. Twin girls, Mary and Martha, who looked so alike that even Caleb sometimes mixed them up. And finally, a last surprise baby when Catherine thought she was done with childbearing, a boy they named Peter who was the spoiled darling of the entire family. The house that Caleb had built expanded over the years to accommodate the growing family. More bedrooms were added, a bigger kitchen, a proper study for Catherine where she could work on lesson plans and read in peace. The walls were covered with children's artwork and family photographs. The yard rang with laughter and shouts as the children played. Through it all, Catherine and Caleb's love remained strong. They made time for each other despite the demands of children and ranch and community. On summer evenings, they would sit on the porch after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the stars. In the winter, they would curl up together by the fire, reading or just talking quietly. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked one night when they were both in their 40s, weathered by time but still healthy and strong. Coming to Provo, marrying a cowboy, living this life. Catherine looked around at the home they had built together, thought about their children sleeping upstairs, about the students she had taught over the years, about the community she had become part of. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That stagecoach dumping my luggage in the mud was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought you into my life." "I was just a cowboy who happened to be passing by," Caleb said, smiling. "You were my miracle," Catherine corrected, kissing him softly. "My second chance, my home." Eleanor Harrison lived to see all her great-grandchildren, passing away peacefully at 83, surrounded by family. By then, Thomas was married and working the ranch alongside his father. Ellie had married a kind man from town and was teaching at the school, carrying on her mother's legacy. James had gone to California for a while but come back, unable to stay away from the mountains and valleys that were in his blood. The twins were courting local boys and causing their father sleepless nights worrying about their choices. And Peter, at 14, was still trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his life. Caleb and Catherine had become pillars of the Provo community. Caleb served on the town council and was known for his fairness and good judgment. Catherine had educated 2 generations of children, many of whom had gone on to college or successful careers. They had weathered economic depressions, harsh winters, family illnesses, and all the trials that life in the frontier brought. Through it all, they had each other. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw a huge celebration. All their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, along with what seemed like half the town. There was food and music and speeches honoring the couple who had built such a strong family and given so much to the community. Standing in the yard where they had first kissed, where they had raised their children, where they had built a life together, Caleb pulled Catherine close. 40 years ago, I was just riding through town when I saw a beautiful woman stranded in the rain. I had no idea that helping her would change my entire life. I was so lost, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. My family was gone and I was alone in a strange place. And then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You carried my luggage home, Caleb, but you did so much more than that. You carried my heart home too. They kissed as the sun set behind the mountains, surrounded by the life they had created together. Their children cheered, their grandchildren giggled, and the community that had embraced a lost young woman from Boston so many years ago celebrated the love story that had become legend in Provo. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and sorrows, as is the way of life. Caleb and Catherine grew old together, their hands gnarled with age but still reaching for each other. They became great-grandparents, watching a new generation of Harrisons run and play in the same yard where their own children had grown up. The little house that Caleb had built had long since been expanded and remodeled by their children, but Catherine insisted on keeping the original bedroom exactly as it had been on their wedding night. The quilt that Alina and the women had made still covered the bed, faded and worn but precious. When they slept there, Catherine would sometimes wake in the night and watch Caleb's face in the moonlight, marveling that this good man had chosen to love her, that their chance meeting in the rain had led to a lifetime of happiness. Catherine continued teaching well into her 60s, finally retiring only when her eyesight began to fail, and she could no longer read the fine print in the books. The town threw her a retirement party, and dozens of former students came to thank her for the education and encouragement she had given them. Many had become teachers themselves, inspired by her example. Others had gone on to be doctors, lawyers, business owners, ministers. All of them credited Catherine with giving them the foundation they needed to succeed. Caleb ran the ranch until he was 70, when he finally turned it over completely to Thomas and his sons. He claimed he was retired, but Catherine often found him in the barn tinkering with equipment or out in the fields offering suggestions to the younger men. The land was in his blood, just as he had said all those years ago, and he could not fully step away from it. On a warm summer evening when Catherine was 75 and Caleb was 78, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the ranch property, their voices drifting up on the evening breeze. The valley was green with summer growth, and the cattle were fat and healthy. It had been a good year. "I have been thinking," Caleb said, his voice rougher than it had been in youth but still warm, "about that day we met. How different everything could have been if I had ridden through town an hour earlier or later, if it had not been raining, if that driver had been more careful with your luggage. But none of those things happened," Catherine said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You were there exactly when I needed you. Call it fate or providence or pure luck, but we found each other, Caleb. Against all odds, two people from completely different worlds came together and built something beautiful. We did we not?" Caleb looked out at the land, at the home they had made, at the legacy of love they were leaving behind. "I've had a good life, Catherine, the best life, and it all started the day I helped a pretty lady with muddy luggage. And it will go on," Catherine said softly. "Through our children and their children. Through the students I taught who are teaching their own children now, through the ranch and this land. We built something that will last, you and I." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, hands clasped, hearts full. Around them, the life they had created continued its rhythm. Great-grandchildren chased fireflies in the twilight. Thomas and his wife discussed plans for expanding the herd. Ellie visited with her grown children, their laughter floating through the open windows. The twins, now matrons with families of their own, worked in Alina's old kitchen preparing food for tomorrow's family gathering. James rode in from checking the fences, and Peter, now a successful lawyer in Salt Lake City home for a visit, sat on the steps playing guitar. This was the life Catherine had never known she wanted, the home she had found when she was lost and alone. This was the love that had saved her, that had healed her broken heart and given her more joy than she had thought possible. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy stopping to help a stranger, carrying her muddy luggage through the rain, and somehow, miraculously, carrying her heart home along with it. Catherine Kendall Harrison died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, surrounded by family. Caleb held her hand as she took her last breath, whispering words of love that only she could hear. She was buried in the family plot on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, teacher, and friend, she found her home in the West and in the heart of a good man." Caleb followed her 2 years later, his health declining rapidly after Catherine's death. His children said he died of a broken heart, unable to live without the woman who had been his partner for more than 6 decades. He was laid to rest beside Catherine, their headstones standing together as they had stood together in life. But their story did not end there. It lived on in the memories and tales of their descendants, passed down through generations. Great-great-grandchildren heard about the day the stagecoach dumped great-grandma Catherine's luggage in the mud, and great-grandpa Caleb carried it all home. They heard about the quick courtship and the enduring love, about the lives touched and the legacy built. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of Caleb and Catherine's descendants, who ran it with the same integrity and dedication. The school in Provo eventually was named the Catherine Kendall Harrison Elementary School in honor of the teacher who had educated so many. A scholarship was established in her name for students pursuing careers in education. The little house where it all began, where Caleb and Catherine had started their married life, was preserved by the family. It became a place where young couples within the family spent their first years together, starting their own love stories in the same space where the family's greatest love story had unfolded. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the cottonwood trees, people swore they could feel the presence of Caleb and Catherine still there, watching over the land and the family they had built together. Two souls who had found each other in a muddy street on a rainy afternoon and had chosen to build a lifetime of love, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one kiss at a time. Their story became part of the fabric of Provo, a reminder that love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances, that kindness to strangers could change lives, that home was not a place but a person. Catherine had come to Utah Territory lost and grieving, with nothing but 3 trunks of belongings and a heart full of sorrow. She had found healing, purpose, and a love that transcended time. Caleb had been a simple cowboy, content with his life, but not knowing that something essential was missing. When he had stopped to help a stranded woman in the rain, he had found the missing piece of his soul, the partner who would walk beside him through all of life's adventures. Together, they had created something that would outlast them both. A family built on love and respect, a community enriched by their contributions, and a story that would be told for generations as proof that sometimes, in the midst of life's storms and struggles, Providence sends exactly the help we need. Sometimes that help comes in the form of a kind cowboy who carries our luggage home, and in doing so, carries our hearts to exactly where they belong. The end.